this mom decided to adopt a baby girl. Then she discovered the child was related to her son. In May 2017, Katie Page took a much-wanted step into parenthood by adopting baby boy Grayson. Then, the following month, the new mom was introduced to a newborn girl who was also in need of care. After Page had invited the two children into her home, however, she made an astonishing discovery about the pair. Page was born in Birmingham, Alabama, although she later relocated to Denver. And in November 2014 she got a job at G.E. Johnson, a construction company based in Colorado Springs, Colorado. In particular, she works as an integrated services manager overseeing a range of different building projects. However, before she joined G.E. Johnson, Page was also dealing with the aftermath of her divorce. During this period, then, she did plenty of soul-searching in a bid to get her life back on track. And in the process, she realized that she needed to make some significant changes. "I knew that God was calling me to be a woman quite different than who I was at the time," Page wrote in a 2018 blog post on her website Wood and Grace. "I remember literally looking in the mirror one day and sobbing at the woman I saw, and I knew that I was not the woman my heart desired to be. I committed to changing my life and making a life that was fulfilling and one I was proud of," Page added. With that in mind, she went on to get her job at G.E. Johnson later that year. And Page also took on an ambitious personal project by purchasing a new home that, as she later related, was a bit of a fixer-upper. "The house I bought would require extensive work to transform into my vision, and most of which I would have to do myself in order to afford it," Page wrote in her blog post. The house was a large 4-bedroom home. "I told my friends at the time that it was meant for more, even though I really didn't know what more meant at the time." And while Page was slowly piecing her life back together, she also harbored an ambition that had been with her since childhood. The Alabama native had dreamed of having kids of her own for years, although fertility problems had set her back during the course of her marriage. However, Page's childhood wish was reignited only 2 weeks or so after moving into her new house. At that time, she was sent an email from her church. And while reading the message, the construction manager was drawn towards an advert for an informal meeting about foster care. "I did not know anyone who fostered children or was raised in a foster home," Page wrote on Wood and Grace. "I really knew nothing about it, but my heart called to learn more. When I proceeded to ask my mother, who was helping me with the renovations, 'Would you go with me to this informational session about foster care?' she said, 'What?' Page's mom then offered some words of caution about Page becoming a foster parent at such a time in her life. After all, she already had enough on her plate with work and the home renovations. But despite that initial reluctance, Page's parent eventually relented and accompanied her daughter to the meeting. And while there, Page herself was greatly affected. "What I heard that evening about foster care gave me chills and scared me, but it also pulled at my heart in a way I couldn't stop thinking about it," Page later wrote in her blog. "I continued to pray and work through the idea of taking on children of trauma as a single full-time working woman." Then Page made a decision that changed her life forever. "After lots of contemplation, on Mother's Day of 2015 I completed my application and took the next step to becoming a foster mom and beginning a new adventure," she wrote. And around 1 year later, she was fully immersed in her new role. Page was looking after her 4th foster kid at that point, in fact. But her mindset was slowly changing. While spending time with the young boy, she mulled over an idea that would significantly alter her long-range plans. And after thinking things over, the foster mom spoke about her newfound ambition with her caseworker. "I wanted a longer-term placement and potentially one to stay forever," Page later explained. "Up until then, I had really only focused on temporary placements, but I was cautiously open to fostering to adopt if the option presented itself. And, at my caseworker's next home visit, I revealed my desire to be a child's forever home." Then, not long after that discussion, Page received an important message. "I had a voicemail on my phone in the middle of the workday from my caseworker," she recalled on her blog. "It was about a baby boy who had been abandoned at the hospital, and it was likely to be a foster-to-adopt situation." And with that, Page sensed a real opportunity to realize her dream. The baby had drug exposure but was not showing signs of withdrawal and would be ready to discharge the next day, she went on to write. "I immediately called my caseworker back and said, 'I want him. Give me 5 minutes, and please don't call anyone else.' Then, after Paige had talked her decision over with her mother, she arrived at the hospital the following day to pick up the newborn baby. And from there, the foster mom duly brought him back to her house. She still had one more big task to grapple with, however. You see, the youngster was nameless at that point. The nurses had simply dubbed him Baby Boy. Fortunately, though, Paige had already compiled a lengthy list of potential monikers for the new arrival. And as she looked through the choices, one name in particular stood out. Ultimately, then, she chose to call the baby boy Grayson. Meanwhile, before Grayson had settled in, Paige had invited her mother to stay at the house over the following months. She was, after all, still looking after the other foster child. I had no idea how I would be able to take care of a 14-month-old and a newborn all by myself, so I knew I needed help, the construction manager admitted. Still, while Paige's mom was prepared to assist her daughter, the next few months proved quite challenging. It was during that period that Paige began to search for Grayson's biological parents, but that particular endeavor turned out to be somewhat tricky. The information left at the hospital never led to anyone, she later wrote in her blog. No one answered the ads posted in the newspaper or came back to the hospital in search of the boy that had been left that day, Paige continued. At that point, the foster mom started to feel some contrasting emotions about the search, ones that left her in a tough position. Part of me was relieved that no one came forward, so that Grayson would be mine forever with no opposition, Paige wrote. But there was always a pit in my stomach about one day having to tell my son that no one showed up at his termination hearing. No one came looking. While my little man had been prayed for and longed for by me since I was a child, I still knew that discussion would be one I would dread for years, Paige added. Despite those anxious feelings, though, the mom took the next step in her relationship with her foster son. Yes, after 11 months together, Paige finally adopted Grayson. She decided to hold off bringing in any more foster children, too, as Grayson was facing some physical and mental challenges owing to his exposure to drugs while in his mother's womb. Wanting to focus on her son's development, then, Paige planned to wait a few more months before opening her door to another child. But her stance quickly changed following a conversation with her caseworker. And yet again, the mom was presented with an intriguing suggestion. After asking me how we were doing post-adoption, she began to tell me about an emergency placement they had for a 4-day-old baby girl with drug exposure that was at the same hospital as Grayson had been born at, Paige wrote on Wood and Grace. And she was needing placement that afternoon. I could feel the fear inside me and the chills in my body. I was overwhelmed at the thought, Paige continued. Yet the feeling also told me to keep listening and to consider this placement. Something was different about this one. So, later that day, the foster mom welcomed the baby girl, who was named Hannah, into her house. And as it happens, Paige then uncovered an incredible coincidence when reviewing Hannah's medical records. It seemed that the newborn had faced the exact same level of drug exposure as Grayson had experienced. The pair displayed matching conditions, too. But the similarities between the two children didn't end there, as Paige noticed later that evening. As I reviewed the bracelets on the baby girl, I saw the first name of her mother match the name that Grayson's mother had given to the hospital, Paige wrote in her blog. I continued to review the discharge papers from the hospital. And when I came across the date of birth for her mother, I had to take a second look. It looked familiar. Previously, Paige had enlisted the assistance of a woman named Ashley Chapa, who was living at the house to help with the two children. And so after noting the recognizable birth date, the construction manager pulled out Grayson's details and shared the information with Chapa. Then, before long, they both made a potentially unbelievable connection. You see, Paige quickly realized that the birthdate of Hannah's mom was just a day away from Grayson's, and this revelation in turn led to a remarkable moment. My roommate and I were looking at each other wondering if we were thinking the same thing, Paige later explained. Could they have the same mother? And Chapa had been left in disbelief at the possibility that Grayson and Hannah were related. It was as surreal as you could imagine, she told Good Morning America in January 2019. Katie got her binder out from her paperwork with Grayson and we realized, same first name, everything. From there, Paige conducted a bit more research before getting in contact with Grayson's caseworker to discuss her findings. After that, she received some information about Hannah's mother that only strengthened her suspicions. And by the end of that week, Paige and the baby girl were set to meet the woman that appeared to be Hannah's mom. Furthermore, that encounter left Paige even more convinced that her theory was right. Then, a few days later, Paige's caseworker met Hannah's supposed mom for the first time, even though she was doubtful that the woman was actually the biological parent of the little girl. But as it turns out, Paige's hunch appeared to be correct. The caseworker called me shortly after the meeting and said, "Katie, I think you're right." Paige wrote on wood and Grace. "Her story literally breaks my heart, and I can't believe it, but I am 90% sure that you are right and this is a miracle." The conversation didn't end there, though. About 45 minutes later, the caseworker called me back and said, "Katie, now I am 100% sure," Paige added in her blog post. "We just found the last name she gave with Grayson's birth for a relative of Hannah. I cried as I hung up the phone. After that breakthrough, moreover, Grayson and Hannah underwent a DNA test that ultimately revealed the pair were indeed brother and sister. This happy coincidence therefore led Paige to pursue another adoption. And as 2018 came to a close, she finally officially united the siblings by bringing them both into the same adoptive family. Hannah is the opposite of Grayson, Paige told Good Morning America in January 2019. "He loves to chill, and she's a wild thing. As soon as I started figuring it out that she was his sibling, I said, absolutely, I'll adopt her. Once I took in Grayson and I accepted being his mom, I accepted his family." However, there was one more twist still to come in this remarkable tale. Yes, Paige was told about yet another baby sibling, and she ultimately ended up taking in Hannah and Grayson's little brother ahead of Hannah's adoption. She is hopeful of being able to make the child an official member of the family in 2019. And Paige later reflected of her situation, "I was a single woman in a 4-bedroom house, and now every room in my house is full. It's never dull. People ask me all the time, how do you do it?" She added, "I never thought I'd have 3 babies, but God doesn't give you more than you can handle."